Okay, so so far I have already applied Arnold shader, okay, and I'm going to start testing my color. So I'm going to look for something like clay. Let's check on my reference. And this looks a little bit too brownish. Maybe I need more saturation. Okay, that's a bit too much saturation. And I'm just going to move up and down my slider until I find the right color that I'm looking for. Okay, so I'm happy with this one. Okay, and this is gonna stay now in my color samples, so I can always copy back from that. I can also create a flat node. Okay, and just sample and keep this one with that color so that I'm sure that I'm not losing that color at any moment. Okay, so this is going to be anyway on my utilities or my materials. There is my flat, so I can actually take it out of here and I'm not going to lose it. Okay, that's just an extra thing. So now, as I mentioned before, when we analyze the material, I'm going to open here my material and I'm going to analyze how my shader is. Okay, I actually pick quite traditional realistic base. Okay, and so I'm doing kind of like a mix of all of them, and it's not going to be completely realistic because then I would have to actually create precise textures. Okay, so I'm going to do this whole thing just with procedurals. And what I see here is that I see the sediments of the clay. Okay, it's kind of like a terracotta kind of brick clay, and it has these patches of like lighter color and darker color. So I'm going to create one diffuse color for the patches and another one for the sediments, and I'm going to combine them, and that's going to be my base color, my base diffuse channel. Okay, so I'm going to keep going back and forward to my reference, by the way. So I'm just going to put it here on the side. So for my base, for the patches, I'm going to create a 3D texture, and it's going to be my stucco. And I already mentioned before that stucco is a typical wall finish. And I'm going to call this my patches so that I don't get confused. From now on, every single node that I do, I'm going to rename, okay? So place 3D stucco or patches, because I'm going to have so many nodes that then I'm just going to start getting confused about these nodes. Okay, and in this color, actually, I'm not sure I want these patches. I'm just going to add this right now, and I'm going to check how it looks in my object. If you don't see your texture, you can just, you're probably on 5, just press 6 or click here. Okay, and I don't want the patches to look that way. So I'm just going to edit this a little bit, maybe less of a shaker. So I actually think this is all right. I'm just going to leave it that way. And now I'm going to change the color of these patches. Okay, so I go to the channel and I actually have the colors that I already created. So I'm going to take those. Okay, and I'm going to, if I see my patches, some are more like desaturated and brighter, so that's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to put it a little bit desaturated and maybe brighter. Okay, and those are going to be my patches. So now if I observe it here, it's working quite well. I actually think I want more of this shaker so that I have more definition. Okay. And I want to actually change this. I want this one to be the darker one and this one to be the lighter one. Okay, yes, that's more like I want it. And now I'm just going to scale it up. And for that, I'm going to take my 3D patches and scale this node up. And I think this is about the scale I want these patches. So now I have the patches texture ready. Now I need to create the sediments in order to combine it with the patches. So my sediment, I can already press here 1 and keep it small, okay, so that it doesn't distract me. So I can disconnect this, and now I can create my sediments, and for my sediments I'm going to use granite. So far I don't need any projection node because everything is 3D textures. So for my granite, I'm actually not going to put any colors, I'm just going to desaturate this whole thing. Okay, and this I'm going to combine as in an overlay, because when I overlay the original patches with the granite, it's going to take the color, but it's just gonna take the luminosity of it. So you usually have a luminosity blending mode in Photoshop, and let's see what blending modes we have in the composite. So let's say this is my granite. Okay, I'm actually going to add it to my base color. Sorry, I stopped there for a minute because I had a problem with my granite. So the thing is that in my viewport, it actually is not looking properly redistributed, but if I render, I actually see that the grain of my granite is proper. Okay, so that makes me think that maybe the stucco is not proper, so I'm just gonna check to be on the safe side. Okay, so if I re-render this, yes, actually the size of my stucco was not ideal. It looks different than here, it's a bit smaller. Okay, also less sharp, but that's okay. Okay, and let's say I'm gonna keep that one. Okay, but my granite doesn't look good here, but it does look good in my render. Okay, I was wondering why this was happening, and so as I said before, I'm going to keep my granite just desaturated colors. Okay. Okay, and why do I keep granite in the saturated colors? Because once I combine them and I overlay them, this is just going to make a difference on the luminosity of these patches. Okay, so next step, I'm going to just make sure I have the right names. Okay, and this would be my sediments, and this is the 3D texture of my sediments. So play 3D sediments. So far I didn't really change the scale of my granite because it doesn't really matter. It's on the right scale already from the beginning. So now I want to mix the patches with the sediments. Okay. Click on tab and look for AI composite, and I'm going to plug the patches on A and the sediments on B. Okay, and my operation is going to be overlay. Okay, I mean, you can test whatever operation works for you, but just keep in mind that for example, multiply would for sure end up darker. Depending on what you're going for, it is a different operation. Okay, so now if I just plug this on my base color and render again, then now I have the sediments plus the patches. Okay, so in theory, I could say that I have my base diffuse color figured out. Okay, so if I compare right now here, I could actually say that the sediments are a bit too big here. Okay, this is well, it is granite, so I'm just going to either make them smaller or change the settings of my granite, which is now called sediments. Okay, so let's check that. So I think by changing the cell size, I can just make it smaller. Then let's check on my render again. I'm gonna make this smaller again. Just gonna stop this. And this is looking more like the clay now. Okay, and I think I'm gonna be happy with this one. Maybe I just reduce this spottiness a bit. Okay, now this is looking a lot more like my clay, like the ones I have here. Okay, I have enough sediment and I have enough of the patches. Okay, so now the next step, I have my basic diffuse. I'm going to close here the render. Okay, and if I leave this in composite, I'm not going to remember that that's my basic diffuse color, so I'm just gonna call, I can leave this as composite, okay, but just make sure that you put diffuse color, or you put whatever name that works for you. maybe base color. Okay, now I'm just going to select all of this and press 1 and keep them small over there so that they don't distract me. Now the next thing is that if we go to our material, so remember we were defining first the diffuse and the specular, and then whether it was a bump or anything else or a coat. So if we check our specular, right now it was actually in half of the weight, okay? So if I render this, okay, you see that it's very reflective here where I have these lights, which by the way are not my final lights. You see that the surface is really reflective, but in this case here, I don't see any reflections, okay? In my case, that's because I don't have anything to reflect. I just have behind it, I have my backdrop plane, and that's all I have, okay? So I'm never really going to see anything reflecting on the front. Another thing we should remember is that we have, so far I haven't made any projection node because it's 3D textures. In the case you are taking a specific texture, you have to keep in mind that either you do the UV mapping or you use a projection node, which is going to be between the color and the next part of my network, okay? So now the next thing would be to think about my specular and my displacement, okay? So let's check about my reference to see how this is going to work. Okay, and what I can see here is that, for example, in this one, it has like a coat, like a protection layer that has been put on top of it, and I see some particular displacement or bump that is special to the whole clay model. So you can tell that it was on the clay, and then when they painted on top of it, then you have other things. And then I can also observe here that on the paint part, I have a little bump, okay? So I'm gonna keep those things into account when I create the bump. But then my next step is not going to be neither the bump nor the specular, but actually creating this pattern, which is part of my diffuse, okay? Because the specular, I'm just gonna leave in this kind of satin color. So I can either do that on my coat, which is here, but in this case, I'm just going to do it on my specular. So I'm just going to increase a little bit my roughness. Okay, and I'm going to check how this is rendering. So I'm going to increase my roughness until I have the material as I want it. Okay, and this is already quite close to it. I'm going to increase it a bit more until I have this kind of satin finish. So it's not completely glossy, okay, but it's also not so matte, okay. And if I would be really precise, you actually see that the paint seems to be softer than the clay, okay, but that's in this model. In other models, that's not the case. So I'm just going to decide here, in this one, they are both the same. I'm just going to decide here that I'm going to have everything on the same one. If I would decide in another way, then I would probably have to put a map on my roughness. Okay, so let's check on the way. So next thing would be my pattern. Actually, I'm going to leave the pattern for the next video. And the one thing I'm going to do before going into the next video, it's going to be saving my file. Okay, you're going to see me doing this a lot in this tutorial, because when you're working with the render and the shader network, you might get a lot of crashing happening. And so every time I finish one step, I'm going to save my file. Okay, now we go to the next video.